welcome to everybody who's online. This panel is something we don't always do, which is really important, I think, for our industry to talk more about, is on the operation and migration side of the industry. So I've asked three very different, so we're going to have some very different opinions in terms of the roles of the different businesses. I've asked the panelists to come along because of that, really, because they have a kind of a different look. So I think what we'll start by doing is just asking, if you don't mind, to introduce your business by also answering the question is around whether cloudification has made it easier for enterprises and service providers to migrate and operate services, and what role do you play in helping that? Now, I know you each play a slightly different role, so maybe we could start with Hayden, just explaining kind of, has this cloud thing made it really a lot easier for enterprises and service providers, and kind of what role do you play within that?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for the opportunity, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to the group that have joined us on this panel session. I appreciate the opportunity. So my name is Haydn Faltyn. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called BroadSource. We are a software development and engineering organisation that has been specialising in cloud calling platforms, specifically the BroadWorks cloud calling platform, since about 2002. And we continue to develop a range of products that help our customer base, many of which are the CCA membership that are joining us here today as well, to help them better manage the subscribers that operate on their platform and or move subscribers to their platform. So really, cloudification for us was about the opening up of APIs, and it meant that open APIs plus web technologies for our product development team meant that we've been able to develop a range of use cases and orchestrations between systems in and amongst the service provider's environment that probably until recently many thought were sort of impossible use cases to actually be able to orchestrate. And one of those more complex use cases that we find our customers using our EMU platform for is service migration. And we see our EMU migration technology being used in three key ways in cloudified calling environments. And firstly, we see it being used to help the migration of enterprises, departments, groups, in and around the cloudified calling platform itself. So think of everyday sort of operational teams having to respond to customers' expectations and changes around mergers and acquisitions and relocations and load balancing techniques to better manage the customer's requests for change. And it's probably the first way in which we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years our migration tech being used in that first instance. The second instance we're seeing our technology being used is in the consolidation of cloudified calling platforms themselves. The opportunity to consolidate switching platforms. And we heard Clark talk about customers' decisions about what style of cloud calling platform is best for them in the future. We are participating in that sort of consolidation of cloud calling platforms as well, using our migration technologies. And probably thirdly, our tech is being used as a protection and or acquisition strategy in the on-premise PBX and its migration, and its accelerating migration and move to cloud calling platforms. Matt?
Okay, great. And from my experience, lots of service providers still have multiple platforms and they're working on how to get some users from another. So that doesn't seem to have gotten away. And maybe because traditionally they've seen it quite difficult to do. So you're helping with that. So Yossi, I think you come from a slightly different angle, still involved in that migration side, but much more on the enterprise from what I understand, as well as helping the service providers. So could you just kind of introduce how you're seeing that change and what role you're playing in solving that problem?
Thank you, Matt. I'm Yossi Charron, the CEO of Univonix, and we are a migration company. So we take legacy PBX and migrate it to cloud PBX. Simple as that. And we support multiple sources, multiple targets. And I think that what's important about the discussion we're having here and the question you asked is that for us, cloudification is not a question of if, but it's a question of how. So how do we going to treat that? As a migration company, this is what we're focusing on. And the question now we believe is that everybody will eventually migrate to the cloud, but the issue here is how fast it will be, how efficient it will be, and we are driving to have a much better efficient way to do and make this process happen, because we believe that if we were able to do it in a much more cost-effective way, in a faster way, for enterprises and service providers at the same time, the whole thing will be much more accelerated. And we don't want the migration to be a daunting task. We want friends like Hayden from BroadSource and Alex to have more opportunities to put things on top of the cloud system and help them do that. But the basic of everything is to make sure we migrate as much as extensions as possible out there, if they're from the carrier perspective or from the enterprise perspective, the cloud systems. And this is what we're here for, and this is what we're performing in a very fast, efficient, and unique way, and this is what we actually do. Matt?
And you built some technology to make that process a lot easier, than traditionally it would have been done, which we'll probably touch on as we go forward. Alex, I know you come from a totally different angle, but it seems this was the sort of the first operations panel and migrations panel I put together, and we've been talking recently. I've been pretty interested in what you guys were doing for some of the big cloud providers. I thought it'd be useful to just share kind of your experiences. So maybe you could explain kind of how you're helping those cloud guys, but from a different perspective. But some things are linked, but from a different perspective. So, Alex, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, very much from a different perspective. So I'm really happy that you're having this panel. I agree with you wholeheartedly that the operational side of delivering communications is often kind of overlooked, as it is in many industries, right? And so I'm really excited to share with you guys. We say from a high level, Dashbase's mission is to unify data for unified communications. And so our role to play specifically in the cloudification of communications is to provide end-to-end visibility of the different systems that are deployed, whether they're deployed on premises or in the cloud. So I'll talk a lot more about it, but from our angle, what we see is the challenge of moving to the cloud is magnified by the fact that the data generated by these systems is requisite in order to provide solid communications. And so we try to make that data available, and we think it's really important for the service delivery teams to have access to the data as we go from a primarily on-prem world to a primarily cloud world. There's this thing in between where everybody has some degree of hybrid cloud going on. And that visibility across all the different platforms, all the different servers that are run is key. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. And as you said, that's the angle we come at it from.
And you've been working, quite a young company, but you're working with some pretty big guys already. I think 8x8 are a public reference, I think, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Before, I hope they're a public reference. If
yeah.
We are now.
We are now, yeah.
That would be a bit of an embarrassing moment, but anyway.
You spilled it, not me.
Yeah, no, exactly. I just accused in another session of the comms channel of being lazy, and everybody on the panel who have them as their customers were backing away from that statement. But so if we move forward and sort of say, just give some insight to the issues that you're dealing with daily, which, the service providers, as they migrate and they manage these platforms, what are those sort of the bits and nuggets of insight that you are helping those guys with? Maybe, Hayden, you could give us some insight. We talked at high level, but what are the kind of common issues that you see that you're kind of addressing now with service providers in those three models that you highlighted?
Yeah, Okay, so our experience tells us that, and it'll be no surprise to the CCA membership and my colleagues on the call, that the issues kind of fall into three areas, and it's traditionally been the time and costs associated with the resourcing of migrations within the service provider environment, which usually has no revenue attached to it. It's not a chargeable activity. So how do you structure yourself up to in your best interests, relocate these customers to your cloud calling platform? And so the time and costs associated with this traditionally has been a major barrier. Further, kind of the accuracy of the data that's available to you in the migration, and that's sort of based on the lack of visibility available to make important decisions. And the third one that we think is a significant one, we see it often when we are working with our customers in migrations, in consolidations and move from premise to cloud and cloud to cloud, is the service or product mapping and transformation of the data models from source to destination. And that's been the other really big drag on the issues, if you like, in being able to accelerate the migrations. So our work in ENU has been specifically to target those three areas to drive more highly automated and well thought through orchestrations between systems with our customers who are using our ENU platform. ENU stands for extraction and manipulation and update, and the E in extraction is one thing. It's about the M in manipulation in ENU, which is the key thing for us, and it's allowed us to deploy sort of large scale migrations for service providers that remove as many steps as possible, remove as many questions to be asked of the customer as possible, and to do all the checks and balances along the way, to be able to do things like track migration accuracy in real time, and to make really key business decisions about the instigation of a rollback strategy, for example, during a migration based on certain thresholds that are being received off the platforms as you do these migrations. And so all of that kind of is the codification of 20 years of experience of working in amongst these cloud calling platforms, and our ENU platform is sort of trying to codify a lot of those things that sort of have been in the heads of voice engineers inside cloud calling platforms for the last little while.
Yeah, that's interesting, and particularly the thought that often these things don't have revenue attached to them, and these guys are often on a revenue drive, but it does have churn and other things attached if you get it wrong, which are equally scary. So Yossi, from your sort of practical experience working both, with the enterprises, but also, supporting channels and people who are undertaking this, what have been those common issues that you come up against, that you're helping to solve?
Yeah, first I have to say that Hayden is spot on, and most of the issues Hayden meant the same issues we are dealing with. But I would the perspective I would like to add is getting the clarity of the data as soon as possible. So that the task of understanding the situation, the environment, and the challenges the customer or the service provider is facing in the customer's environment can take weeks and weeks, and sometimes even months. And it's a costly process, and it's a one, because it's a lot of labor for just learning what you have and what can be done and how it can be done. So it's a lengthy process, and it's a daunting task. It's been done mostly manually. So the way we look at it is we're trying to find ways to automate this type of the investigation. In many cases, it's called the discovery phase, to do it as short as possible. And we are able to shorten this process into 24 hours, not weeks, not 24 hours. This is what we're aiming for. And we have this type of capability. And we think that the more we know, and we'll be able to have a discussion, a meaningful discussion with the customers and the service provider based on facts, on actual facts of what exists inside the legacy system, then the discussion of what's going to happen in the target becomes much more easier, much more straightforward. Our goal is to try, and we think the way we look at it is that challenging the market is to create clarity as fast as we can in terms of what is in the situation, in the sources and what can be and cannot be, and how, if yes, how can we migrate and move it to the cloud.
And you've been also dealing, I think, quite a lot with the Microsoft sort of stack for quite a while, which is pretty hot on everybody's agenda at the moment in terms of what's going on in the market. So is there anything we should know, pitfalls, experiences that you could shed a light on all the people here who are either looking to migrate now people from or to Microsoft? I know you've done a lot of work in that space that we were talking about the other week.
Yes, the thing I will say is that everything becomes, Microsoft discussion becomes a lot more easier with the customer once they know exactly what they have inside the PBX. Feature parity is a main discussion here. So and there's a lot of different type of perspectives around feature parity between what we have in the legacy and what we have in the cloud. Reality is not that bad. I can tell you that from experience, and this is probably the most important message we can convey. In most cases, when we do the analysis, the automatic analysis, we see higher percentage of full feature parity between legacy to cloud, much more than teams or in specific, much more than people will estimate before we enter the process.
Okay, interesting. That's a good message. So Alex, maybe you can dig a little bit deeper into what you're doing and the problem you're trying to solve here. And what the issues that really started, help you form the business, but what are those issues that you're looking to solve?
Yeah, you bet. Love the conversation about the challenges of migration, and I might frame Dashbase as helping with that goal that Yossi called out of getting to clarity on the data that's coming from the different systems. So what Dashbase does is allow you to ingest data from any of the different systems that are inside of your platform. You ingest all of that stuff into Dashbase, which runs in your cloud, and then you have access to it, and you can search any of that data across the entire platform. And specifically, because communications ties sessions between all those servers, we help tie all those sessions together as well. So it gives you a single place to view all of your data. And one phrase that I heard from a provider a long time ago that I loved and repeat is that one of the challenges that he talked about that they deal with is what he called swivel chair, where he's got a system where he can see this data and he's got a different system where he can see that data. Maybe he can log in and see an admin platform for one particular provider, but he's got to go to a different admin platform to see data from a different provider. And so what Dashbase does is allow you to ingest all that data into one place. So under the covers, Dashbase is honestly, it's a big data system that you can put tremendous amounts of data inside of. Think at communication scale and millions of calls a day, right? You can put all that into one system, and then it's all easily accessible and searchable to you. So I'd say that one of those main things that we're talking to our customers and prospects about all the time is how they have data spread throughout their organization as a result of using many different products and many different servers to provide their platform. And so we try to help unify that all together.
And that's where I was actually going to go next. So you've segued very well into, this is a big question for service providers. They've got so much data knocking around in that, whether they're trying to migrate or whether they're operating a system, they're dealing with lots and lots of, holding lots and lots of data. So, you've touched on it a bit more, but maybe the other guys could talk a little bit about how that problem and how you're helping analyze and map that, and how important is that problem. So Jossie, just to go out of order, so we change around a bit, and you don't always go second. Jossie, maybe you could talk about how much of that is a problem. I guess it's what you're solving as well. I mean, in the migration game, that's what you're extracting, is it, and looking at and helping people see and understand.
Yes, I think that the basic of everything we discussed here is data, and that's the essence of everything and how to deal with it. Our part of this discussion is to make sure we're working on accurate data based out of the legacy, and this is sometimes not that trivial to say that it is easy to extract that data, but we need to make sure that we are collecting all the data in a very, very accurate way. One of the things we do is we don't check everything, because pieces of data that are not necessarily 100% consistent, we will not use them. We'll prefer to go and through a migration without fields like locations if they were not consistent and filled properly. So it's not, in our side, it's about collecting the data in the most accurate way, cleansing it, because we know there's a lot of inconsistencies in legacy systems, and mapping it in the best automated way to the target system with other sources of data. So it's in a way you can look at it as a kind of a collaboration data tool. So we take we take the data from the legacy, we take the data from Active Directory, we take the data from Office 365 tenant or team tenants, if you wish, and we put them all together into one place so you can look at the broader picture for the migration purpose. In this way, this holistic approach allows us to minimize data issues and to make sure that we validate all the process, including licensing, including number porting, and everything else around that externally to the system, and provision it in the most easiest way. So I think that taking care of the data is making sure we know how to map it together, collect it together from all sources, and using only the one we know we can trust and are accurate.
So Hayden, you get the benefit of going last here, because most people have said. But I mean, you're doing that in a similar way, but at a service provider scale quite often. So
we think obviously we all know that sort of information is power, and data is important. It's what we kind of do with that that's important. We found in our experience, and we worked with one of the CCA members here in one of their migration projects recently, and we found a direct correlation between the amount of dialogue and the amount of questions you ask, the amount of interaction you have with your customer, and the opportunity for them to churn away. And we think that's a really interesting thing, that you need the data, but you don't necessarily, you need it for yourself. You don't need it for the customer. We have this view in our migration strategy of we've got to understand it. It's really important, powerful stuff, the data, but we kind of want to move as much of the spaghetti as we can without having too much conversation with the customer. In the migration strategy, there was a direct, we could see it, plain as day. The more questions the service provider asked of their customer, the more the customer thought, well, hang on a minute, here's an opportunity for me to think and to move away. And our approach to migrations is a lot more about just kind of waking up on a Monday and you're moved to cloud. And that's the design intention and the ambition. But we see the data is key, but it's key for the service provider to make better decisions about not asking questions and about not having deep interactions with customers who use that information potentially to create a competitive situation and potentially churn away. So for us, we'd like in principle to move all the spaghetti, and when it's on the cloud, then let's use it as a service improvement. Let's fix up the spaghetti. That's how we try and use data in our migration strategies, because that underpins the concept of protection. And we've got to protect the base. It's existing revenue you can't lose. So that kind of underpins the logic that we put inside EMU to remove the number of questions. That's the design intent.
And that's an interesting discussion that we all had previously about, there's a balance here between wanting everything, but also keeping the customer. You don't want to end up churning the customer because you've made it seem too daunting and and worrying within that. So, and half an hour, we were going to run on a few minutes past because we didn't start to 5 minutes late. But maybe we could. And I'm kind of, in some ways, this is a problem for somebody. Well, your business is helped with this problem, so maybe you don't want to solve this problem for the service provider completely. But what are the best practices that service providers should think about and put in place in their OSS and BSS to future-proof against this? Now, I know, Hayden, for instance, you mentioned, I know, Alex, that's what you're doing as part, and Hayden, you mentioned that's what you're doing as well in a way, taking some of this problem out and, helping people with mergers and acquisitions by running one consistent platform and similar. But, I mean, is there any sort of hints or tips, maybe Alex would go with you, in terms of what are the best practice? What should service providers start to think about? I know you're in terms of the OSS and BSS around this to help future-proof them in the from problems moving forward.
Yeah, it's such a good point. The words future-proofing, right? Because as we all know, the demand for communications is just growing so quickly that you've got to think where you're gonna be in a couple of years. And so what we think about and what we encourage service providers to think about is the different the different services or servers that they are adding to their platform are generating huge amounts of data. And so people need to be cognizant of the fact that all of those different components that you add to your platform result in the end, and as your call volumes increase, they result in the end in way more data than many of the systems on the market were really made to handle. And so we encourage people to think about that. Number two, to think about all of that data from those different servers, it means something in the abstract. And so we try to abstract all of the, let's call it operational data, the log data, the SIP captures, CDRs. We try to abstract it away into one single UI where somebody can access it and can leverage it without necessarily understanding exactly how to find the SIP captures from this SIP proxy and from that PBX during exactly the right time and try to put it together in their head. Instead, we try to make that accessible to many more people. So we would encourage providers to think about how do you empower more of your service delivery team to be able to engage in making customers happy. I think that it's also, I'm sure everyone would agree that the competition globally for being a provider is fierce, and more players are entering the market. We've talked a lot about Microsoft Teams. Big players are entering the market, and it matters a lot what your end quality of service is. So we try to help our customers think about first call resolution of issues. How do you empower those frontline people with more and more information? I love what Yoshi was saying earlier about the collection being key. I think Yoshi called out several types of data that Dashbase isn't really focused on, right? We're not focused on CRM data, Active Directory data. We're focused lower than that. We're focused on logs and SIP captures and that. But this problem runs the gamut. And so I think kind of what you said earlier, Matt, is spot on, that there are multiple angles that they need to think about this from. Our particular angle is that kind of lowest level data format.
And just thinking that every time you put a new service on, you're creating a whole load of data and how you're dealing with that, rather than just adding more and more new services and without that constraint. Okay. And Hayden, you've been working, I know you for a long time, working with service providers all around the world doing this, so and helping them with their problems. So what's the best practices you've learned other than deploying EU, which is obviously what you should do, but what are the best practices that you've seen you've seen throughout that?
So I'll probably just share two stories with you from our two experiences recently, and one of them relates to how to future-proof the SP's business around how to capitalize on their OSS, BSS investments, which are difficult to maneuver through rapid times. We have a Swiss telco who is using our technology integrated into their OSS, BSS to offer their customer base, their existing customer base, a way to migrate to a try before you buy platform, in effect, and then back again if they wish not to be moved. So the ability to future-proof their business by capitalizing on their OSS, BSS, all the billing, the charging, and where the cash goes, but then also to use our technology to give customers an opportunity to migrate to a better place, a future-proofed place on new platforms being manufactured by the cloud calling vendors. And so we see that as a really great use of migration as a way to offer customers incentives to move to new capabilities in try before you buy style mechanisms. And the second one is about the feedback loops, and we're seeing some great ideas around giving customers feedback that a service is not just configured, but is actually operational, and to give them the feedback in real time that their service has been activated and provisioned and migrated. So we have this concept in our business called not just EMU, but EMU poo, which in UPU is the concept of the proof of the operation, not just the configuration of the migration. And so we're doing a lot of work in integrating the proof of an outcome through synthetic work to prove that something's working and roll that back into the OSS, BSS systems to say to them, it's now okay to start invoicing. Here is proof, and maybe even verbal proof of contract that a service is now successfully migrated. So there are a couple of really good experiences we've seen over the last 6 to 12 months or so of implementations of integrations of migrations into existing systems.
And Yossi, you're going to get the last word, which is always good. You're going to get the last word and what you've learned. If you could just express that to us, that'd be great.
Okay. I would say this. First of all, our integration and work with OSS, we have some impact on that. BSS, not much. But in terms of the operational perspective of a carrier, service provider as a whole, I will make it very short and straightforward. I believe service provider needs to have much better engine to support number porting, because the way it is today, it's something that the way I experience that in the ground, service providers will lose business because the way they treat customers in transition. And this is something that customers are having problems to deal with, and we see that all the time. This is one thing. The second thing is everything about automations and APIs to the assistants. Everything around, I think that service provider needs to open up and understand that the world has changed and is more different today, and we need to have a more cohesive environment. Just look at this panel and 3 different companies that are doing different pieces of the same thing, and if we were able to work together under one same roof, it will be a win-win for everybody, including definitely for the service provider. So there need to be much more openness. And the last thing I would say is to allow much more self-service capabilities. Okay. I think that in the world today, the millennials expect that. This is what we're looking for with our customers. And this is why our customers sometimes are choosing the platforms they're choosing, because they have a lot more self-service capabilities. And in this case, I believe that these are at least from my experience, the places that we need to go, and service providers need to go with us together in order to captivate and provide good service and quality service to the market.
Well, with that, I think I'd like to thank you for taking part in our first, and it won't be our last, operation panel. I think it's been some really interesting areas there. We're now, for the people who are on the people who are on the call, we're now going to go off and run the Shark Tank. Should be quite fun, which will be the last thing before the alcohol and networking session at the end. So, which is traditional with every one of my events I run. I don't touch a drop, believe it or not, until the last thing. So I shall see you all at the Shark Tank. See you later, bye.
See you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.